Welcome back, you guys, and the NBA playoffs have boosted the reputation for certain star-level players and superstars. You can also say the same for some role players that weren't expected to do damage in the playoffs. Certain guys have been heroes for their teams. The playoffs for other guys aren't so great and they turn out to be disappointments. Some players are thoroughly scouted, exposed by their matchup, and unable to affect the series. Before we talk about those heroes and disappointments of the first 3 rounds of the playoffs, I'd like to first thank SeatGeek for sponsoring this video. If you want to see a sporting event, comedy show, or concert, the best way to do that is through the SeatGeek app. They do all the ticket searching work for you by putting every single ticket from that event into one spot for you to pick from, so you don't have to check multiple sites. They then give those tickets a grade 1 out of 10. It has green circles for good deals and red circles for bad deals. If you're still not sure about the seat you picked, they have an interactive seating feature that you can click on and see what you'll be getting before you buy. As always, when you support SeatGeek, you're also supporting me, so if you're thinking about going to a concert or a sporting event in the future, click the link in the description and you can get $20 off your first ticket purchase by using my promo code KANE when you check out. My first surprising player is Rodney Hood, who has rewritten his narrative in this playoffs. Outside of one game in the NBA Finals, Rodney Hood was a disappointment for the Cavs. In his last year in Utah and 1 season in Cleveland, he looked like he was always caught up in the moment. But with Portland, he looked like a real NBA player. He was somebody you can rely coming off the bench, and he played big minutes against the Warriors. Rodney wasn't good in the OKC series, but in the next round against Denver, he saved them a few times. When Dame was struggling and the Blazers needed scoring in their non-starter units, Rodney was able to not only keep the game close, but extend leads. Malik Beasley and Jamal Murray have no chance against him when he got into the post. Rodney is 6'8", so he can see right over those guys, back down, dribble a few times, and shoot over them. He's going to be a free agent this summer, and he got himself some extra looks for these playoffs. The next disappointing player is Clint Capela. After the Rockets beat the Jazz in Game 5, Clint Capela was feeling good and let everybody know after the game he is looking forward to facing the Warriors. I definitely get why Clint was itching to play them. The Rockets were their biggest competition last season. They were up by double digits in Game 7 and very close to making the finals. You expected Clint to be motivated and clearly win his matchup at the center position, but that's not what happened. Outside of one game, however you look at it, he either got outplayed by Kevon Looney or it was a stalemate. That cannot happen when you're making $20 million a year. His defense was bad and he got beat on a few 50-50 rebounds that swung a few extra points that the Rockets needed badly. This is now the 2nd year in a row where Clint has been played off the floor by the Warriors, and it's why he might get traded this summer. But at the same time, I'm not going to go too crazy about this. He still had a good season, and judging everyone through a Warriors lens is dangerous. I said this on Twitter before, just because you're game planned out of a series by the Warriors doesn't mean you're not useful on or against 28 other teams. Clint Capela is still a good player. Kanter was a big hero in the playoffs this year for Portland. The Trailblazers were going into the playoffs without Jusuf Nurkic, who was having his best season up until he got a season-ending leg injury. They picked up Kanter off of waivers after the Knicks dropped him. It wasn't going to be the same style, but Kanter can fill in some of the gaps in the starting lineup. One of the things that people were pointing to for OKC to win this series was that they were going to be able to exploit Kanter on defense. Kanter is arguably the worst big man defender in the league because of his inability to defend in space against wing players and guards that can pull up from 3. But OKC couldn't exploit that weakness with their current roster, so Kanter was able to use his size in the paint and just sit back the whole game. Seeing him outplay Steven Adams in a playoff series was not something I was expecting before the playoffs started, not to mention he was playing with a separated shoulder. Kanter is playing slightly worse against Denver and wasn't good against the Warriors, but he played better than we all expected, so credit to him for doing this while injured. The next disappointing player I have on here is Eric Bledsoe. I've talked on my channel last week about how Bledsoe was part of the reason why the Milwaukee Bucks lost 4 straight games against the Raptors in the conference finals. Eric Bledsoe signed a 4-year extension in the middle of the season, and no one really looked at it like, oh, the Bucks messed up. He was playing the smartest basketball of his career, plus the last year on that contract extension is non-guaranteed, so it is a team-friendly deal. But now it's looking like there's a clear ceiling on your team's success in a conference finals if Eric Bledsoe is your lead ball handler on offense. He was a negative on offense in both the Celtics and Raptors series. He wasn't closing games in part of the Raptors series because he wasn't being defended on offense and is bound to make a dumb play. He's still a good player, plays all NBA level defense, and will win you games in the regular season, but when you get to the later rounds, his weaknesses as a quick decision maker and three-point shooter are on display, so that's why the Bucks got to bring back George Hill. The next disappointing player on my list is Nikola Vucevic of the Orlando Magic, and I think you probably saw this coming because of the matchup against the Toronto Raptors. With his free agency coming up this summer, Nikola was on a steady run all season, putting up career numbers in points, assists, and rebounds, and he got his first All-Star appearance. He was the nucleus of Orlando's offense the whole year, and he was legitimately a good player. But outside of one game in the Raptors series, Nikola was really disappointing, and it showed everybody why signing him to a long-term deal limits your ceiling as a playoff team. If your aspirations as a franchise is making deep playoff runs, you probably don't want to rely on Vucevic for 30 minutes a game. If your expectations are a competitive team that can make the playoffs here and there, make an 8 seed, make a 7 seed, then that's okay, you can bring back Vucevic. Nikola found himself in the Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka torture chamber. He couldn't establish post position to get himself easier looks down in the paint, and he didn't space the floor as a shooter like he did in the regular season. The playoffs are much different because teams and scouts are game planning for multiple days, specifically against you, so your weaknesses are exploited in ways that were not during the regular season. Nikola definitely found that out in his 8th NBA season. At the beginning of the Brooklyn Nets season, Caris LeVert was the best player on the team that was right in the middle of a playoff race. He was looking like the frontrunner for most improved player, but his season was halted because of a right leg injury that looked like it was going to be season ending, but fortunately he was able to come back in after a few months of recovery. When he came back, no one was really expecting much. LeVert definitely struggled in his return. In the month of March, he was not the same player and his shooting efficiency took a hit. You could tell he still was not comfortable driving to the rim like he was at the beginning of the year. Personally, I didn't have any real expectations for him in the playoffs because he was still recovering, but at least he was out there. But just like in the beginning of the regular season, Caris was the Nets' best player in those 5 games against the Sixers. He was a lot more comfortable as a driver and shooter. He had his legs underneath of him. One way you can tell somebody is feeling more comfortable after a leg injury is by their free throw attempts. Caris was going to the rim a lot that series. He was a big surprise to me. I definitely wasn't expecting this after him struggling so much in March. Moving on to another disappointing player, we have Kyrie Irving. He shot below 40% from the field in 9 playoff games. Now let me first say, I'm not going to sit here and be a Kyrie truther, but some of his struggles didn't come as a surprise. I thought the Bucks series would go at least 6 games, but at the same time I expected him to have problems reading, reacting, and adjusting to an elite defense in a playoff series as the primary creator. This was something new that he just never saw in his career. Kyrie has played great defenses in the past, but there's a difference when an entire defense is focused in on you, and you're also expected to set everybody else up on your team. Kyrie struggled with that mix, and there's nothing wrong with that. Kyrie's still a top 12 player in the league to me. The problem is that he and the Celtics talked way too much about saving their best for the playoffs while they were losing regular season games and picking up bad habits. Kyrie wanted this and did not deliver. He was doing some bizarre stuff in that series, like willingly switching on to Giannis and giving up baskets. I really don't know what was happening with Kyrie in parts of that Bucks series. My second to last player that was a hero for their team in the playoffs is George Hill. The Bucks made a trade for Hill back in December, and I didn't expect him to have this big of a role in the playoffs when the trade happened. I definitely thought he'd help with 10 to 15 minutes off the bench, but because their starting point guard Eric Bledsoe was a minus on offense, George was playing in the crunch time lineup. I've seen some people say, where was this in Cleveland? The thing is, I actually thought George Hill was fine in the playoffs last year for the Cavs. He could have played better in certain spots, but he wasn't a negative or anything. I was just really shocked watching him lead the Bucks bench unit versus the Celtics starters. He was blowing by people, defending Kyrie well, and getting timely offensive rebounds and running the floor for layups. You really haven't seen George Hill have this type of spring in his step since Indiana or Utah. My last massive disappointment for this video is Russell Westbrook, of course. I don't want to keep harping on his negatives, we all get it, but Russ has to be included in here. It's just getting to the point where Westbrook is running out of excuses. When OKC lost in the first round versus Houston in 2017, the team was still recovering from losing KD, so no one is really going to slander him after how clutch he was during the regular season. When OKC lost in the first round against Utah in 2018, there was slander, but Carmelo Anthony was a scapegoat, so some people were saying they'd be better next year on both ends without worrying about having to integrate Melo. There's no excuse now. Damian Lillard outplayed him in their matchup, and the common criticisms of his shot selection, decision making, and defensive awareness were on display in that 5-game series loss against Portland. The last player on here as a hero has to be Kawhi Leonard. I don't have much to say here. In just one season, he's gone down as the Raptors' best player ever. No matter what happens in the finals, Kawhi's Eastern Conference run will be remembered. This was the best case scenario when the Raptors made the trade for him last summer. So if you make it to the end of these videos, I really appreciate it. The finals start tonight, or game 1 has already happened by the time you watch this. So follow me on Twitter if you want to, because I will tweet during the games. I'll see you guys soon.